Hello, everyone. This is Greg Drevenstedt, editor-in-chief at Rider Magazine, and your host for the Rider Magazine Insider Podcast. Our guest on this episode is Rennie Scaysbrook. Rennie is one of the hardest working motorcycle journalists in the business. He's road test editor at Cycle News, which cranks out a new issue every week. Rennie travels the world testing motorcycles, and he writes race coverage, news, and features for the magazine. But that's not all. Rennie is also a motorcycle racer who has competed several times in the Pikes Peak International Hill Climb, where he set the motorcycle record in 2019. Rennie competes in several race series. He campaigns a Pirelli-sponsored Suzuki GSXR 600 in the Chuckwalla Valley Motorcycle Association series. He races the Roland Sands design Indian Chief in the Super Hooligan National Championship Series. And in June, he'll get his first opportunity to race in the prestigious Isle of Man TT. If that weren't enough, Rennie is a husband and a father. His son, Harvey, was the inspiration for him to write and publish a children's book called The Big Book of Motorbikes, which is available through Amazon. Rennie and I had fun recording this episode. We spent the day riding more than 300 miles at the press launch for the new Suzuki GSX-S 1000 GT Plus Sport Tour. Then we recorded the interview after having a few drinks at dinner. We talk about Rennie growing up in a prominent racing family in Australia, how he became a moto journalist, and what prompted him to move to America. We also take a deep dive into his experiences racing motorcycles at Pikes Peak, the good, the bad, and the ugly, as well as his preparations for the upcoming Isle of Man TT. Stick around for another great episode. A warning to listeners, this uncensored episode includes adult language that isn't appropriate for work, children, or delicate sensibilities. All right, so we're going to get started. So this is a special episode of the Rider Magazine Insider Podcast because we are actually in a hotel room in Paso Robles, California. I'm with my friend Rennie Scaysbrook. He's the road test editor for Cycle News. Part of the reason I wanted to interview you is you wrote a children's book, but that's just one of the many things about you. You are, as I said, the road test editor for Cycle News. You're an accomplished racer. You have the track record for the Pikes Peak hill climb. And you come from a racing background. You have a racing family. So before we talk about your book and so forth, tell me a little bit about your background.
Well, the first thing is I've always wanted to share a hotel with you. Greg Drevenstedt, must say. It's all good. I guess for better or worse, I've come from a fairly prominent racing family. If you go real back in the family tree, like my grandfather was a very successful motocross racer back in the 40s, 50s in Sydney, in Australia. Well, all around Australia, actually. And but then he had two sons, and both of them became very big. Obviously they wanted to be like Dad, and especially my dad, Jim, he became a very successful racer. Peter, my uncle, also was a racer, but Dad was the one that really sort of pushed it on, and he started his own Honda dealership back in the day in the early 70s, right when the big the world motorcycling boom was happening. It wasn't just in Sydney; it was all around the world, and. He started his own Honda dealership, met my mother. My mum was racing at the time, just doing the odd things here and there. My auntie used to race as well, Chris.
So was this motocross as well as road racing?
No, mum was road racing, but Dad originally was more of a, they used to call it short circuit, which is flat track, dirt track, however you want to call it. Dad was real good on fast dirt track racing. And that was very big in Australia at the time. They had things like a 6-hour race at Nepean in Sydney, which is a real big event. Very well sponsored by lots of the industry people back in the day, industry companies, and eventually he moved into road racing. Became friends with a fairly well-known guy called Mike Elwood.
Oh yeah,
He became very good friends with Mike, and that led him on to the TT and lots of other things in his life, and he's done very well for himself, and he's become a bit of an elder statesman now. I mean, I guess he's 73, probably is a bit of an elder statesman, but he's certainly earned his place in especially in Australia, but world motorcycling in general.
So you grew up going to races with your parents as they would compete, and you would go with them as a kid,
Yeah.
or is it? When did you sort of pick up the racing
Mum.
bug?
I never saw Mum race. I wish I did.
Oh yeah.
But I think Mum stopped racing. I think Mum's racing was just for a bit of fun.
Yeah.
Dad, I remember going because Dad was always involved. So the backstory with the Hayward thing is Dad and Mike became friends because Mike moved to New Zealand after he stopped racing Formula One, and but then he got bored being in New Zealand, and I think he was selling boats or something or other at the time. I mean, you go from being the fastest motorcycle racer in Europe, in the world, to selling boats in New Zealand. So it's a bit of a difference. And so he ended up going across to Australia, and he met Dad, and they started doing classic racing, and Dad beat him a few times, which, to put in perspective, is like me beating Valentino Rossi on 10-year-old bikes that are 10 years older.
Right.
You know, which is kind of funny because like they were racing early 60s matchlesses and AJSs and the British singles and that kind of stuff,
right.
Which at the time, in the early 70s, they were literally only 10 years old. So it's kind of like jumping on a 2014 R1 and beating Valentino Rossi, which not going to happen. At least not for me, it's not happening.
Right.
But they became good mates, and they obviously had the same sense of humor and self-deprecating sense of humor in a way, and they ended up, going to the TT together. The whole thing with Mike and the TT happened pretty much because of the relationship with Dad, and they were teammates in this race called the Castrol 6 Hour, which was a very, very big race back in Australia back in the 70s. Like, that was the race to win.
Okay.
It was production bikes. Like, I mean, down to the horn had to work.
Right,
I don't know about the tyres, but you couldn't touch suspension. You couldn't do anything. They had to be as you turn the key off the showroom floor.
Wow.
So that they did that race a couple of times together, and then Mike got the bug again, and he went to the TT, and he asked Dad to come with him, and so they all sort of went along together, and Mum was always in the background and doing the good thing, but I mean, I was always like, I just always grew up with racing. I mean, not just with racing, but just with bikes.
Sure.
Like, my earliest memories as a kid was sitting in the garage with Dad and his mates. They'd just be there because Dad was the linchpin of the group. Every group's got
right.
that guy that they always gravitate towards. And my godfather, who's long departed, who I still revere now, like, he always said that Dad was his idol almost in a way. And he was 10 years older than Dad.
Yeah.
And I just remember, being 7, 8, 9, 10 years old, every Saturday there'd be Cherokee, Vincent, Duck, Uncle Ott. They'd all be down the garage,
right,
sinking piss from 12 o'clock until 7 o'clock or whatever it is, and they'd be tinkering in old BSAs and Velocets and whatever, and that was just the thing. And I don't think Dad ever really wanted me to race, because if he did, he would have pushed me into it, and
right.
He never did.
Right.
It took a lot of pestering for me to do it, and in one way I'm happy about that, in some ways maybe not, but I never really had the talent to do it as a pro, and that's why I kind of pivoted into because I always wanted to get paid to ride motorbikes.
Okay. Yeah.
If I couldn't do it as a racing thing, I thought, well, the next best thing, and I always liked writing, so I always thought the next best thing would be to be a bike journalist. And when I left school, I was a car mechanic because I was being a dickhead as far as not thinking about what I wanted to do. All I wanted to do was go out and party and just hang out with mates and do dumb stuff, and that was great for a few years, but eventually you get to 23, 24, and you're like, hang on a minute, I'm going down the wrong path here.
Right.
And my girlfriend at the time, she was working for a fairly prestigious private college in Sydney, and she's like, well, there's a journalism degree that you should do. You've been talking about this stuff since, I was dating her from when I was 18. We're long broken up now, but this is when I was 24 at the time, I think. And I was like, yeah, the hell with this. I was getting every day I would get dumped with diesel oil from Volkswagen transporters.
Right.
And I was like, fuck this. Like, I'm over this. And I hated work. I hated it, man. Like, it just like the waking up in the morning, going to a job that you hate, especially when you're young.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, I don't know. Like, I'm not saying that you can do it when you resign yourself when you're older, but like when you're young and you feel like you've got all these opportunities, it's like, because when you're 20s, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but like when you're 20, you can kind of make a lot of mistakes to pretty much make up for it.
Sure.
So it's like, I was like, oh, the hell with this. And I went backpacking in 2006, and I went all around Europe and went to the Mugello Grand Prix, and I have two friends, like long-time friends in Australia that were racing the World Endurance Championship, and I saw them go race in Belgium, and I got friends in Germany, friends in Lithuania, friends in Poland, and just visited all of them and wrote all these really long emails and realised that I like writing. And I was like, the hell with this, I'm going to go and be a bike journo. And
so you went to school to study journalism?
Yeah, I did. Yeah, I went to Macleay College, which was Tanya's college that she was working for at the time. And I did a 2-year journalism degree. Very intensive. It was, what was it? It was radio, print, and television, although I had no interest in the television. The radio side I kind of thought maybe, and now looking back on it, I wish I had paid more attention to it because of the whole podcasting thing.
Yeah.
It's just like, but I really liked writing. I enjoyed the process of it. I enjoyed the creative side of it. I like writing about things that aren't about motorbikes if I have the knowledge base for it.
Sure.
But my knowledge base has always been motorcycles, and I realised that, I mean, one of my dad's best friends and has since become a very good friend of mine is Alan Cathcart.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, Alan Cathcart basically got me the job at Cycle News, which we'll get to a little bit later. But I saw the life that guy lived. Yeah. And I'm like, I want that. Like,
well, yeah, I mean, Alan Cathcart's ridden, all kinds of motorcycles, special motorcycles all over the world. And he's, his riding is in, dozens of countries and a lot of outlets. He's like the ultra motorcycle journalist, in some ways. So you studied journalism, but you got pretty lucky and got a job pretty quickly in the industry, right?
Yeah, I was very lucky. It was a bit of a baptism by fire. Like, my dad knew a guy called Jeff Ware in Australia who was running a magazine, called Rapid Bikes Magazine. It's a very good magazine. So we had like Performance Bike Magazine, which was the UK version. I think it was called Street Bike Magazine back in Australia, which is basically like guys taking sports bikes and hotting them up. And it was back in the days of long swing arms and turbos and GSXRs and Hayabusas and all that kind of crazy shit. They used to come primarily out of America that went via Europe and got turned into street fighters and then fed back into Australia. It was kind of funny, and like now that you can see, I look back, I can see the progression of where all that stuff went. Because we used to get a lot of information, we used to get a lot of stories, out of Europe, especially Germany. And I didn't care what the hell I was writing. I didn't give a shit. All I cared about was the fact that I was getting paid to ride motorbikes.
Right.
I didn't have to work on Volkswagens anymore, which is great. I worked on the clock, don't get me wrong, I was there. And because that's the other thing too, is like when I left being a mechanic, became a journo, I was so used to that regimented, like you start at 7:30, you finish at 5, and there is no screwing around in between, which is probably good for Jeff as well at the time too, because I was his first employee. So I had that military sort of mindset of like, we literally punched the clock. We had our cards, we go punch the bloody clock. We punched the clock, and then I just kind of took that mindset into rapid bikes. It didn't work out with me and Jeff, but I learned a lot just in the 18 months that I was with him, or 15 months, whatever it was. And then I went to Australian Motorcycle News and got the job as the road test editor, which was kind of weird because it was the job I always wanted. Like in Australia, like road test editor for AMCN is the job. I mean, the only job.
So how old were you when you got that job?
I was 20. I just turned 25.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah, and I'd had a year and a half experience, and all of a sudden I'm now the voice for AMCN.
Right.
Granted, I had a lot of help with a lot of experienced people.
Sure.
Mark Willis and Alex Gobert and those guys that were helping me along the way. But I was still the one writing the stories and putting these things out there. And now that I read back some of the stuff I wrote, god damn. Like, shit. I mean, it's embarrassing. But it was a learning process and whatever, and I got better over the time.
Right.
And by year 2, year 3, I started to really find my feet. And, but like the competition side of things, I didn't care at that point. Like I'd already been racing early 2000s. I had a good go at trying to maybe make something of it. Maybe get to pro level in Australia, I guess is probably the best I could have ever hoped for. And then in 2003, one of my best mates, Reece Bansell, he was killed at Eastern Creek, which is now Sydney Motorsports Park. But that really took a lot of shine off racing for me. I had stopped racing probably by halfway through 2002. I had a really big crash at a circuit called Iron Park, which isn't there anymore, and smashed the bike to bits. And like I got out of it all right, thank God. But like I was just over it.
Yeah.
And like, Dad either didn't have the money, didn't want to spend the money. It doesn't really matter.
Right.
Like he understood more than what I did, and I just didn't have the money, full stop, let alone the want to keep going. And I realized how badly I didn't want it when a guy called Warren Willing, who is a big legend in Australian racing, he's no longer with us, but I used to look to that guy like he was God when I was a kid. He was Wayne Rainey's crew chief back when Rainey was winning championships with Kenny Roberts. And I remember having this conversation with him. We were at a funeral for one of their friends, one of Dad's friends, one of Warren's friends, and we were talking about racing. Somewhere we got on this conversation, and I said to him, I go, yeah, I couldn't afford it. And then he said to me, I'll never forget, he goes, it doesn't matter. He goes, who cares if you can't afford it? You'll figure it out. And I realised then that I didn't want it. I didn't want it as much as what I thought I wanted it.
Right.
And that made, in a way, it was almost comforting. Like it was a nice thing to hear from, because Warren was like the guy in the 70s. He was the, Mick Doohan, Casey Stoner of the 70s for Australia. Yeah. And for him to say that to me, and considering how much I revered the guy, really kind of made me go, okay, maybe I didn't want it.
Well, I mean, even if you're going to realize your dream, which is becoming a racer, it's very hard work. So you've got to have that passion, that fire in the belly, and if you don't want it enough, then it will be even that much harder, I imagine. So
it's weird too. It's like it's this thing of like racing has it's a thing where it has to be driven by the parents, because unless a kid is other generational talent, they're not going to know they really want it until they want it. You know what I mean?
Sure.
So there's 15 years of the parents pushing them, and I've seen it time and time again, where the parents are the ones that want it.
Right.
And my parents never did that. And I understand why they didn't, because, I mean, I have a 5-year-old son, and I don't want to do it for him.
Yeah.
I mean, not that I don't want him to race, and not that I don't, but it's just like, I see the strain that it puts on kids, and it puts on families, and the financial strain. I mean, holy shit, like the amount of money that you got to spend to be, especially now, that you got to be, even have a chance to have a go.
Right.
Like, not even to be the guy. I understand now why Mum and Dad did what they did, and that's cool. Like, I'm totally happy for it. Yeah. What I am very happy about is that I got the love of motorcycling.
Right.
Because motorcycling is so much more than racing. Racing is a bloody fraction of what motorcycling really is.
Right.
You know, like to fast forward which is kind of why I'm in America, to fast forward a bit, by halfway through 2012, so I was 3.5 years into being the road test editor at AMCN, I was just like, fuck it, I'm over it. Because AMCN was hard.
Really?
Like it was a 2-week magazine, Cycle News is 1 week.
Yeah.
But it was harder at AMCN. Like, you had to grind so hard. Like, we were cranking out so much work.
Right.
Big features,
Yeah.
like 3,500 word features.
Wow.
That took 4 or 5 separate breakouts. Now, you can punch out 1,500 words, and it's cool. And, like, if it's 1,500 good words, then it's great.
Right.
But we would do 3,000 words, 1,500 body copy, and then 500 word breakouts on top of it, each of which took its own day's worth of work to do. Right. So it was so hard, and then but I'm grateful for doing it. But by the halfway through, I'm like, I don't know, fuck that R1. I don't want to ride that thing. I don't care. The hell with it. Like, and it was really frightening because I was like going, this is what I want to do, and like, this guy's giving me a factory prepped R1, and I don't want to ride it.
Right.
I'm like, what the hell? And so I had a good friend of mine, or still have a good friend. She's her name's Hannah, and she's in London. She's actually moving back to Australia this year, funnily enough, after about 15 years. But she was my old flatmate, ironically, at the time when I was doing college. And I had this great idea that I was going to surprise her in London. She didn't know about it. We had mutual friends. My now wife, her old best friend, was living in London, and so we hatched this plan where I was going to fly into London. And we were going to surprise Hannah, but it was also going to be this whole thing of like, for the tax man, it was like, I'm going there to do a story, and I did. I went from the bottom of England to the top of Scotland and all the way around. I did the whole lap of the UK on a GS. But yeah, when I surprised Hannah, had the best time. I jumped on that GS, and then I just did this big tour, and I went from London to Leicestershire, did the Triumph thing, then went to, I can't remember where it was. I went to stay at Guy Martin's house, the TT racer.
Yeah.
Stayed at his house, and then we rode from there to Fort William in Scotland, Fort William to Carlisle, all through the Lakes District, all through the back ends of the UK. I can't remember where I stayed after that, and then back into the UK. And I went, fuck, that was good. Like, that was fun. And I kind of understood a different side of motorcycling,
sure,
which I guess is a bit more the rider side of like the isolation and the... Because you got to be pretty honest with yourself when you ride and you don't have music,
right,
and you don't have play a podcast. Like, it's you and your own thoughts.
Absolutely, yeah.
And that's not always a good thing.
I'd say it can be good, it can be bad, depends on what your thoughts are. Yeah, sure.
Yeah, it's not always a good thing. I mean, I've had talks with Dad about this. Like, there's some pretty dark shit that can come out, and that's when I started to realize the therapeutic effect, I guess, of riding.
Yeah.
And we after I came back, it was September of 2012, came back, and I'd already made my mind up I was going to quit AMCN. I had no idea what I was going to do. And then I was talking to Dad, and Dad, bless him, has a podcast I want to talk about. Dad is the editor of Old Bike Australasia, which is by far the most successful classic bike magazine in Australia and New Zealand.
Yeah.
Definitely one of the biggest ones in the world. It's been going since 2005, and his publishers, Next Media, were looking for a separate bike title, and they said, "Do you want to come on board?" and I needed a change, and I was like, yeah, sure, let's go.
Yeah.
And so the original idea with Freewheeling magazine is what we called it, was it was based off primarily adventure riding, but it was also motorcycle holidays and touring and just that side of riding,
right.
not the competition side.
Right.
But unfortunately, it's like, I did that for 2 years. By the end of the 2 years, the competition element started to creep back into the magazine, and I started to do racing, and then doing racing and writing stories on the racing I was doing. It's a bit like an addict going back to the needle.
Right.
In a way, and then I we ended up. It didn't work. It was a good magazine. It's a good magazine, but it didn't work. And then we went to America, which is.
So how did that? You said Alan Cathcart was instrumental in helping you get your job at Cycle News, but what motivated you to leave your home country to come to the United States? You still worked for a motorcycle publication. You're still a journalist, but why did you want to make such a big leap?
I didn't until I did. Okay, so the story with this is a bit of a weird story. I had typed up my letter of resignation at Freewheeling because I was just like, I can't deal with it anymore. Like, the publishers and I weren't getting along.
Right.
It just wasn't the right fit. So anyway, I typed my letter of resignation out. I'd printed it, and I was waiting to go in. This is a true story. I was waiting to go into my boss's office to hand him the letter. And I had 10 minutes to wait, and I got on Twitter. And I never get on Twitter. Like, I've probably been on Twitter 5 times since then. I was scrolling through, and I saw a post from Paul Carruthers. Everyone knows Paul in America. And it says, leaving Cycle News after 30 years, going to Moto America to run the this, the that, PR, advertising, marketing, whatever it was. So I sent him a message, and Paul and I had never met. And Paul, obviously, being the son of Kel Carruthers, and Kel Carruthers being a demigod in Australia as far as motorcycling goes, Kel and Dad knew each other, because it's kind of like, I don't know, I guess it's kind of like Mick Doohan and me, I guess, in terms of the age gap, if you know what I mean. Yeah. Like Dad grew up knowing Kel, I grew up knowing Mick. I don't know Mick, but but that kind of difference. And so sent him a message, and I said, what's going on? Professionally we knew each other. And he told me what he was doing, and then I said, look, I'm about to resign from my job. Do you have any freelance work? Not thinking anything else of it. And he goes, here's my phone number, call me. So I speak to him, and it's the first time I've ever actually spoken to him. And I ring him, and I'm like, what's going on, blah, blah, blah. And he says, there's a job going. I'm like, oh, yeah. He goes, no, it's in America. I'm like, okay. So anyway, back and forth we went. 10 minutes later, I had a job offer to move to America. Not even that, 5 minutes later. So I rang up my wife, or then girlfriend, and said, do you want to move to America? And she's like, yeah. And I went, cool, done. And so I hung up, and I walked in, I threw the letter of resignation at my boss, and not through, but I was diplomatic about it, and said, thank you, I'm out of here. I didn't give him a reason why. I didn't tell him that I was going to America or anything like that, because at that point it was
wasn't your motivation. You'd already had the letter written, so it wasn't your motivation for quitting.
No, it wasn't. And it was just, it was a ball ache to get here. I'll tell you, because that was in October, I think, of 2014.
Okay.
And we didn't get here until, I think, the 1st or 2nd of April in 2015. So, give or take 6 months. Yeah. And I had already committed at Freewheeling to working until the end of the year. I got paid until the 31st of December, but the last issue went to bed on the 12th of December. So I got an extra 2 weeks of pay, plus I had holiday pay and all that other stuff. So from the 1st of January until the day we left, I hadn't had a job.
Yeah.
And so but it wasn't solidified. I was actually getting the job. So we went back and forth, and then finally I got the shits for cycling news, like previous owners, not the guys that own it now, and said to them, like, you guys need to give me this job or I've got to do something else. Like,
because you had to get a work visa, is that right?
We had to do work visas, but I just needed income.
Yeah,
I didn't have a job.
Yeah.
Like, and I wasn't going to go and jump on the dole or like welfare or whatever it's called. And it's like, bugger that. And so, yeah, we ended up getting I remember blowing them up one time. And then 2 weeks later, this thing come in the mail. Big stack of papers came in the mail at my place in Sydney, right on the beach in Sydney. And I was like, all right, cool, I guess we're doing this. And it's funny when you throw your life out like that.
Yeah.
Because we literally packed our entire lives into 2 suitcases. And we had a life's worth of stuff. We had bikes, cars, all the shit that goes with it, houses, furniture, beds, kitchen appliances, like everything. We literally chucked everything out on the street. And by the end of the day, nothing was left.
Wow.
All the neighbours came and fucking picked what they wanted and took off.
I've done the same thing when I moved out of places. Yeah.
Yeah, it was wild.
Yeah.
It was wild. I remember my dad had this bench. We had this big wooden bench, huge bloody thing, it weighed a ton. And it was me and 2 other guys. Like, it was the best workbench. It was one of those workbenches where, like, you go, I'm going to put that in the corner. I'm not moving for 30 years because that fucking thing's going nowhere. Yeah. So we took this thing out the street. I swear it lasted 5 minutes. I'm like, I don't know who took that bloody thing, but I mean, he's probably blown 2 discs in his back trying to get home. Exactly.
It's amazing how quickly something heavy will move. Man. When somebody's motivated. So spring of 2015. You and your girlfriend at the time, Annabelle. She's now your wife, Annabelle, mother of your son Harvey. So you guys moved to the United States. You go to work for Cycle News. This is a weekly publication. It's got a long history in the United States. Covers a lot of racing. But you were hired as
I was still the road test editor.
You're road test editor. So you do not only racing coverage and news and things like that, but like right now, the reason we're in a hotel room in Paso Robles is we're at the Suzuki GSX S1000 GT Plus press launch, and we rode 300 miles today, and so you go to lots of press launches, you test lots of motorcycles, and so that's a big part of your job.
That was the job.
Yeah.
And that was always the job. I mean, the competition side and all that stuff was just like, if you could do it, cool, do it.
Yeah.
But it was always a job. And that's the way it was always intended to be as well. There was never any ulterior motive to do something else.
Yeah.
At the time when I turned up, I went into the mindset with a bit of experience, I guess, of it's got to be like I was at Rapid, but with a bit more business knowledge now, having gone through 3 publications, kind of done the bell curve in terms of like the industry status, I guess, whatever you want to call it. Gone from nothing to the top to starting your own thing at the bottom again. So I kind of knew what I needed to do, and it's just like I just wanted to be a sponge and understand the American way of doing things, because we're always told as foreigners the American way of doing things is different to how the rest of the world does it, i.e. you. Not the rest of the world, it's just you.
Yeah, right.
And it really wasn't that different, if I'm honest. I mean, the American industry has just been like marvelous, absolutely marvelous. Like, they have welcomed me with open arms. Yeah. Like, I've had run-ins with 2 people that I can think of, that out of the thousands I've met.
Right.
They have been so wonderful to me. And I mean, shit, I have an American son. Yeah. So like, America is now in my DNA. And not trying to sound soppy about it, but like, I love this country and I love what it's done for me. I love the fact that my son is a dual citizen, because I'll never discount my heritage. Right. But I love the fact that he's American. I mean, I think that's fucking awesome.
Right.
But when we came here, we obviously didn't have Harvey the first 6 months, but just like, like not in Kansas anymore.
Right,
They had
right.
like eyes like saucepans, and it's just like, holy shit, look at this! Like, this is awesome. And it was great. It was just such an amazing time. We were living in this little, it was just me and my wife, and we'd been married a couple of months, whatever it was, and we got this place from a friend of like one of my best mates back home, a guy he went to uni with, now lives out here, and he bought a house in Costa Mesa that had a granny flat at the back that was attached to the garage. Total by chance, because I had no idea about credit ratings.
Yeah.
I didn't know that you needed a credit rating to get an apartment or a pay history or any of that stuff. I just turned up here and just like, here's the rent, can I have the house?
Right.
That was never going to work.
Right.
I just managed to get in through a friend, and because he knew the deal, because he'd been through it before,
Right.
he then like gave me the green light, and so we got in, and we were living on the beach and partying and just, dude, it was awesome.
So, you and Annabelle moved to the United States. You're working for Cycle News. You're getting used to living and working in the United States. So let's. How did you get to the point where you got back into racing in the United States? I know you've done the Pikes Peak hill climb, but what other kind of competition did you do in the U.S.?
Honestly, in the US prior to Pikes Peak, I'd hardly raced at all. So it was, I when I first came to America, maybe were you on the Victory Impulse launch? Remember that shitbox bloody bike that the Victory launched, the electric bike?
Yeah.
Were you on that launch?
I don't know if I've ridden it. I don't know if I was on the launch, but
we went to Colorado. We went to Denver.
Oh no, I didn't go to that one.
Yeah, okay. So we went to High Plains Raceway, and they let us ride that, and then they let us ride Lee Johnston's bike that he rode at the TT in the electric TT race. And you couldn't have got too much further apart than it. But the good thing is that Victory, which obviously is now Polaris, took us to Pikes Peak because they were running Pikes Peak with Don Canay.
Oh, right, yeah, the Project 156. Yep,
Yes, that's right. Built by Roland Sands, who I'm now racing for, which is kind of ironic. We ended up going there, and Don had smashed the bike to bits at the previous, incredibly ironically, at the bloody corner that I crashed at in the race in 2016, which we'll get to that. And anyway, I went there in 2015 as a spectator, and was like, I got to do this. To give you a background, I knew because of Don too, because Don had ridden the multi-strata, I think, previously, and when I was still in Australia, and I thought, oh, that's cool. I didn't realise that bikes rode Pikes Peak. My only interest in Pikes Peak only ever came from the Ari Vatanen Climb Dance movie with him in the Peugeot 405 or 406 or whatever it was, which is just one of the greatest racing films ever made, as far as I'm concerned. And so I thought it was still, I didn't even know the bloody thing was paved when I turned up there. And I was and I saw it and I was like, oh, cool, all right. And then I came back from that after having a great weekend with Morgan Gales and those boys. And I came back just going, I'm doing this. And I saw what the hill climb was in terms of the kind of corners it was, and there was only one bike for the job, and it was the KTM 1290 Super Duke. Okay. And so I went to KTM and said to them, I kind of disguised it a little bit. I said, give me a long-term Super Duke. So I got this long-term Super Duke, because this is back then. I mean, the industry has changed so much in the 5 years, obviously, since COVID and the financial crises and the supply chain issues and the blah, 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 blah. You know, like, back then, it's like, you want a bike? Have a bike. I'm like, give me a Super Duke. So I got this Super Duke, and I'm 6 months into living in America. I got this KTM Super Duke, and I got PAL parts on the thing, and I got a beautiful wife, and I'm living in America. I'm like, this is sweet. So I said to KTM, like, I want to go to Pikes Peak. And I managed, I don't know how, I couldn't sell ice to an Eskimo, but like I managed to sell KTM on them paying for it. And Tom Moen, who was a salt of the earth man, he said yes. Oh, thank God he did. And he and I went to Pikes Peak together in 2016. And I fucked it up. I completely fucked it up. It was because the thing with Pikes Peak, like I did. I qualified on pole. I did that year. Never seen the place before, and I qualified. Actually, I did. Yeah, of course I did. I qualified on pole by 4 seconds. So the Pikes Peak was in practice they'd separate, because obviously you're dealing with the bikes and the cars. So they would separate the mountain into 3 sections. So you'd have the bottom section, and then you had the mid section, which was all the hairpins.
Okay.
And then you had the top section, which was the take the brain out, leave it there, pick it up on your way back kind of area, and just pin it.
Okay.
That was the place where you really went for it. But the bottom section was me. You know, that was road race style. It was like every great corner in road racing, but every single one of them is banked. No off-camber corners, and you're going uphill.
Yeah.
So you throw that bastard in there as hard as you can, and if you have a good front tire and good front suspension, you just bury the thing on the brakes and just stop it, turn it, pick it up, pull the trigger, bang, and you're off there. And it was just, man, I've ridden bikes in a lot of places in the world.
Yeah.
And I still have never got a rush like Pikes Peak.
Wow.
Like, it's just far out. It's just so cool. And so I got on pole, and, all the expectation, I guess, that comes with being on pole. My parents flew out from Australia for it.
Wow.
And, I screwed it up. So you only ever get one run at Pikes Peak per year, and that's your race run. And so I ended up, there's another background story to this, which I'll tell you, but I did the qualifying section of the course, first third of the course, and I just rode terribly. Like, I missed 50% of my apexes, I missed all this stuff, and in the back of my head, I had thinking that KTM USA is on this, and I had KTM branded leathers, I had this beautiful bike, I had Pirelli giving me tyres, I had the whole deal. And I came into Elk Park, and Elk Park is the first point of the circuit where you get above the tree lines. You can see the tree lines because the course goes at basically 45 degrees to the trees.
Yeah.
So you just watch the trees just go, they just disappear, and you're above the trees.
Yeah.
And I felt like I rode so badly in the first third that I had to absolutely gun it. Truth was, I was actually 5 seconds in front, but I didn't know this until way after the
Just
point.
felt like shit, but you actually had done well.
I'd done well. And so I out-psyched myself, and I said to myself that I needed to go through Elk Park flat out, which you could do. And I did. But I got to the end breaking point going about 40 mile an hour faster than I'd ever gone before. And so I hit the brakes, and I had 3 options. First option was like crash, like lose the front and go into the barriers. The second option was to hope to Christ you make the corner. The third option, which is the one I took, was basically dirt track the thing in on the rear brake and hope that you rebounded off the wall. And I almost pulled it off, except I rebounded over the wall.
Oh, okay.
And I landed on the edge of the cliff and all this sort of stuff. And amazingly, the bike stood upright, stood in the middle. And, I got back on and kept going, set the fastest time in the third section, and didn't matter, still lost. But the other story is the guy before me, Connor Tonner, Scottish guy who was riding an SXV. Remember those SXV 450 Aprilias, the V-twin things? Supermoto thing. He went before me. Because back then they didn't do the way they did later in years where they just did slowest to fastest. Like pole position was in this weird time.
Yeah.
So Connor went, then I went. But Connor had gone in the same corner, but he took the first option and he folded the front.
Ooh.
and he went into the Armco and folded himself around the Armco,
Ooh.
you know, like a piece of wet paper. And like we thought he was dead. So we got to the top, and he'd obviously been airlifted. We got to the top, and you know, as luck would have it, Joe Tonner, who's Connor's dad, he was the guy that came behind me. So I got to the top, and I'm pissed off and throwing my helmet and acting like a dickhead and just yeah, not handling it with grace, shall we say. And, but not even thinking of the fact that this guy, like, he didn't even enter my head. Like,
Right.
this guy is fighting for his life. And Pikes Peak had previously, the year before, had lost a guy, and they had therefore implemented I guess they call it like a no speech policy, where no information got out.
Okay.
So you had no idea. And this came to bite us later in the years with Carlin. And so no one knew, and everyone just assumes the worst. So we're up there basically consoling Joe that his son's dead. And it was really fucking heavy.
Yeah.
You know, It wasn't cool. And it turns out that Connor wasn't dead. He was really mangled.
Okay.
Really mangled. It took him a couple of years to get over it, but he got over it. We actually saw him again because Joe came back amazingly to race the event. I think it was 2018.
Wow.
A couple of years later. But still wasn't enough to stop me from saying, I want to do this.
Yeah.
It's a weird place, Pikes Peak. It's a strange place. Like, it's got this weird aura to it. It does, man. It really does.
So you raced KTM Super Duke in 2016, is that correct? So
17 and 18 as well.
17, 18, so you did KTM.
Yep.
And then you went to an Aprilia?
Yes. So in 2018, I lost the race to Cullen Dunn by 0.6 of a second, which to my knowledge, as far as I'm aware, is the closest finish in 100 and something years, cars, bikes, trucks, whatever.
Wow, okay.
Which fucking sucks.
So you were on Aprilia, he was on a Ducati, that was 2018.
2018, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, it was, we lost that one. I say we, I. And then about September of 2018, Shane Bacilio, who's a very good friend of mine, has always been, since I got to America, he asked if I wanted to ride Tuono at Pikes Peak, the Aprilia Tuono. It didn't take much to say yes.
Yeah.
And it was, aside from, the end result, everyone knows what happened. Carlin died. He was faster than me. We won our class fair and square in terms of the heavyweight class. Like, we beat Cody Vaschholz, no worries. Our bike was legal, was 100% legal to the law. It was legal. We had things checked over God knows how many times. We won that one fair and square, but no one won that day. It was a shit day. Carlin and I were riding supermotos together at Apex, Adams, 3 weeks before he died. We were having breakfast together 4 days before he died.
Right.
No one won that day. I felt like I rode really well. I didn't ride to the best of my ability because there's about 3 spots that I can think of where I lost a bunch of time. Carlin was the fastest guy that year.
Yeah.
It's that it is the ultimate expression of that, like, to finish first you have to finish.
Right.
Which is the oldest racing saying in the world.
Right.
But Shane and I had a lot of fun building that thing. Right. That theory, that old Stoic philosophy of, like, it's not the destination, it's the journey.
Yeah.
Kind of theory. That's the first time that ever really rang true for me, because we had so much fun building that bike, going testing, just hanging out. What if we did this? Oh, what if we did, like, the race we did at Fontana together, where we had such little horsepower compared to the super bikes, where we nearly beat them. And we were just, laughing our asses off the whole time. The actual race itself is stressful as shit.
Yeah.
Like, but the process involved, and that was the fun stuff.
Yeah.
And, you know, that's where you solidify the relationships and you have some beers afterwards.
Right. Right.
Yeah.
So, I mean, that's got to be bittersweet. You set the Pikes Peak motorcycle record, but that was the year that, you know, like I said, Carlin Dunn died that year. Since that race, they have not allowed motorcycles on Pikes Peak, and it's unlikely that they will in the future.
I don't think so.
Yeah.
I mean, if they did, they would for sure restrict it. I mean, to give you a bit of background information, I mean, from, I think it was Carl Sorensen, I think the guy's name was. I could be wrong. I should know this. 2015, that year that Don wrapped the bike around the fence at the same corner that I did.
Yeah.
So there was a guy that was killed at Pikes Peak. And from every practice session, I distinctly remember Jim Vidmar and, you know, a couple of the other boys that were there that ran the whole show. Jim was the main guy. He was the sort of motorcycling clerk of the course. Jim and I had our run-ins at the time, but I respected the guy. But, like, you know, we kind of butted heads a few times over the years. But he did his duty as he had to. But he said at the start of every practice day, he goes, don't crash, because if someone fucking dies here or something goes down, this thing stops.
Right.
I mean, it was kind of like, well, yeah, we don't need any other impetus to not throw ourselves off the fucking cliff. We get this.
Yeah, right.
But
right.
I understood it from his point of view, but it was kind of like, it was that thing that didn't need to be said that needed to be said.
Yeah.
You know, thing. And I sort of got it. So I felt bad about that. And I always felt like the bikes were a bit of an inconvenience to the cars, because it is a car event.
Yeah.
And at the end of the day, like, the Pikes Peak organisation tried to put too much shit in one day.
Okay.
Like, for God's sake, man, you got 365 days or whatever it is of a year.
Yeah.
Just do 2 days.
Yeah.
You know, like,
a bike day and a car day.
bike day and a car day.
Yeah.
I mean, like, I get there's so many other factors involved in terms of the national park side of things and the tourist side
Shutting
of things.
the road down.
Shutting the road.
Yeah.
All that stuff. I get it. And I get it also that each day of racing is not just the day you shut down. You also have to shut down the previous day or the day, half of the day, to make sure that everything's clear.
Right.
So really, it's probably 4 days of shutdown for 2 days of racing.
Right.
The Spider Grips team were very adamant on this, which is the team that Carlin and Cody rode for.
Yeah.
They were like, why don't we run our day and the cars run the other day, and then everyone's happy.
Yeah.
But the car guys, I've always felt really bad for the cars, because the cars, you can imagine yourself as a privateer guy, right? So, like, by the end of the time the year I won it, it was slowest to fastest bikes, right? And so that coincided with the best time of the weather, because being a mountain, there's cloud cover, there's rain, there's snow, there's all that sort of stuff, which usually meant about 10:30, 11 o'clock in the morning. And that also meant the fastest cars went in the opposite direction. So I was pole, or if I was pole, or Carlin was pole, we'd go and then pole on the cars, second, third, fourth, fifth,
I see.
all the way down the line. So the fastest guys got the best track time. And their whole goal always was course records. Course record.
Yeah, right.
And to do that, you need the best weather. Yeah. But you imagine that you're a dude that sits there with a car that you built, and your deal is you're going to go and race Pikes Peak, and you're 54th in the line. At 2 o'clock in the afternoon, on the stop, it starts raining. Therefore, the last third of the course is done. Yeah. By 3 o'clock, it's hailing. It did every year I was there. It's probably doing it now. So therefore, the next third of the course is done. Right. So you're never going to get to the top. Right. So, like, why? And you're charging the same money that the guys at the top are making.
Right.
So, it was just, there was a lot of stupid things there, which really the bikes were a bit of an inconvenience. But everyone I spoke to were like, yeah, fuck the cars, we want to see the bikes.
Yeah.
You know, like we were the guys.
Well, just separating. I mean, it's like the Speed Week at Bonneville. I mean, they run some motorcycles at Speed Week, but there's a separate motorcycle, speed runs and so forth, and it makes sense just because if you've only got one course and you've got so many different competitors and so many different classes, it only makes sense to separate it to where you can just so it's just logistically it's a little bit
For
more
sure.
simple. So you. Based on your Pikes Peak win, you've got this summer. It's mid-April right now. In June, you're going to race the Isle of Man TT, where your father used to race.
Yeah.
Will this be your first time competing at the TT?
Yes, it will.
Yeah.
Quietly shitting myself.
So, what have you done to prepare for your first Isle of Man TT race?
So I went there in 2019, in November of 2019, which feels like a lifetime ago now, to do laps in the car. So I was invited over by Paul Phillips, who runs the event. Excuse me. Paul Phillips is employed by the Isle of Man government to be the general manager of the TT. And it came about through my friend David Johnson, who's podium finisher in the TT, factory rider for the TT. He was racing for Honda at the time. And so I went over there in 2019 and had lunch with Paul at the end of the week. After 28 laps in the high car, he said, "What do you think?" And I'm like, "Yeah, I'll give it a go." But it's an intimidating place. It's very intimidating. I never got intimidated by Pikes Peak. Pikes Peak was like, yeah, I got it. It's a hill climb. You're going up the Bank Camber thing.
Yeah.
So I'm going a bit off your question here and how I prepared, but I came back from that 28 laps, and I had already got the PlayStation game, the first version of the PlayStation game, and I started playing it, and it was because it had only been released about a month or two before I'd left to go to the TT. To see the course, it was very close to what I remember in terms of landmarks, in terms of the way the road looked, and you can never. The one thing I learned with Pikes Peak is you can never look at trees because trees grow.
Right.
Like you only if you have to look at a marker, which I've always tried to avoid. It's very dangerous, I feel, in street racing, and I've done street racing all over the world. Like, it's very different. It's very dangerous to look at markers and go, okay, that's where I brake. Unless it's a bloody shop or a house or something. If it's something that could be moved,
right,
which happens a lot in road racing, it's best not to look at it. But when I came back from the TT, I was like, okay, cool, it looks pretty similar. And so I've been playing that bloody game now for 2.5 years. And
so this is a way to learn the course, because how long the course is? How
37 and 3/4 mile.
37 3/4 mile, and so so you've got to have all the turns and all the different parts of the course, and so you've got to learn that because you're going to go in June. You're going to get a little bit of practice time. You've driven the course in a car, but you've never ridden it on a motorcycle?
No, never ridden on a motorcycle. I've done, as I say, the car laps. I've watched 1 million laps online. I spoke to Josh Brooks, Josh Brooks is a British Superbike champion, Aussie guy grew up not far from me. We're about the same age. And he gave me a few tips here and there. Davo, who's one of my good mates, he's given me a lot of tips.
Yeah.
And I don't know. I mean, I find that, especially with learning circuits, and this actually goes back to the job as well. Like, the job as a motorcycle journalist, especially when a track goes, is like you're going to turn up to a track, you're going to know where the track goes, and you do it.
Right.
Like, I'm not kidding myself. I'm not going there to win the thing. Like,
right.
I want to go there and do it. I want to qualify, which I'm pretty sure I'm capable of doing, and then go out and race as best as I can.
Yeah.
I've never gone to a start line going, I'm going to win this, because every time I've done that, I've fucking stuffed it up.
Right.
Yeah.
So what classes are you going to race in?
I'm going to be in super sport.
Okay.
Yeah. So there was maybe a possibility of doing a big bike, like the super bike, or it would have been a super stock build, with which, like as Peter Hickman has shown, is more than capable of winning a super bike race. It's more the tires than anything. You got a 210 horsepower versus 225 horsepower.
Right.
You got to still be able to ride the bike.
Right.
The biggest thing is the tires. Right. But the super sport, the good thing about the super sport is that it is middle ground between all the classes. So you can run super bike practice, you can run super twin classes, you can run super sport classes, obviously. Right. But if you had either a super bike or a super twin class, you are restricted to your class. Right. So that enables me to get a lot of track time. Obviously the guys, most of the really quick guys like Hickman and Michael Dunlop, they're riding all the classes. So they're just doing everything. They're just going round and round and round. I'm not worried about that. Right. I just want to, it's different to Pikes Peak. I knew that I could win at Pikes Peak. This one, I'm the little guy in the realm of the giants.
Right.
The TT is, for me, it's the Mount Everest.
Sure.
You go there and it's after that, and it's also the thing too is just it's the Mount Everest is kind of achievable to the everyday guy. Right. No, unless you're uber special, you're never going to see a Grand Prix grid.
Yeah.
Right. Even if you're going to get lapped, that's the thing. The guys who get lapped in Grand Prix are still better than 99.999% of the world's riders.
Right.
Whereas with the TT, it's there are avenues where the average guy can get there.
Okay.
And so I kind of want to do that. I'm going to be 39 3/4 by that stage.
Yeah.
And I'm not a spring chicken.
Sure.
So it'll be good to go there and tick that one off, and then see what happens after that.
Well, like I said, if your father's raced there, and you've competed in a lot of different kinds of racing, and that's a big bucket list. Like you said, Mount Everest, So I know you do other kinds of road racing. You do super hooligan racing and so forth. But we've been talking for a while. I want to know more about you wrote a children's book, big book of motorbikes. So
big book, yeah.
Tell us about what motivated you. I know you're a father. Yep. Is that partly what motivated you to write a kid's book?
It was completely.
Yeah.
Where it came from was every time I read a book. We had this book that my mother bought me, so his grandmother bought him, called Barry the Bike. It was the most British book ever. It's little CT-110 postie guys that are going around the British countryside delivering the mail. The bike is called Barry. And, I remember reading this thing and I'm like, I could write something like this. But I also wanted to do something that had a bit of information on the current industry, I guess, because I couldn't find it.
Yeah.
And so I wrote this book. It was just for Harvey, honestly. Yeah. And so many kids around the world. I've sold books in bloody India. I've sold them in just all through Europe, like Italy, France, Germany, UK. I've sold heaps. I sold them in Israel.
Wow.
Just all through Amazon.
Yeah.
Sold a bunch in America. And that has been, to the gratitude of a lot of my friends in the industry that have pushed the book for me. And it was never a deal of trying to make money. It was trying, because I gotta be honest, I am a little worried about the direction the world motorcycle industry is going, just because of primarily the speeding laws.
Sure.
That's a big thing, but that's a whole nother thing. But it's just I also feel that kids need to get exposed to a little bit of danger.
Yeah.
It makes you think, keeps the pulses in your brain going.
Sure.
And thankfully, a lot of parents around the world think the same thing. Yeah. But it was only ever a little exercise for my boy, as it says for my little rider Harvey.
Yeah.
And it's worked out good. It's worked out to be something that a lot of kids around the world have found joy out of, and hey, you can't go wrong with that.
So you wrote the book, you had somebody illustrate it, and so how would somebody buy a copy of this book, big book of
It's all on
motorbikes?
it's all on Instagram. It's all on Amazon.
Okay, yeah, it's easy to find.
It's
Just
super easy.
Yeah, just
just
search
go
for it.
on there and just type in the big book of motorbikes.
yeah,
It's one of those things that, I mean, I have read the book so many times before I published it, and then I've hundreds of times that I read it to Harvey. I mean, the good thing, what I wanted to do, right, with the book was I wanted to separate the volumes, because I know after 4 years of reading God knows how many children's books in all kinds of different styles to Harvey,
right.
that sometimes you'll get bored of certain things in the
Right.
book. So I wanted to splice it up so that parents can read chapters, and they're basic chapters, it's like, what colours are motorbike manufacturers? Like KTM is orange, Caddy is red,
Right.
that kind of stuff. So the kid will go, I want to read about colours, and then you go to the colour section, and then you go to the record section where Robbie Madison's done the longest jump, or Valentino Rossi has so many Grand Prix wins.
Right.
Just so that it's nice and easy for parents, so that they don't get bored of it.
Yeah.
But the main goal of the book is just to make sure that we have a growing generation of new riders.
Yeah.
Because I think yourself and especially me, we came out of that generation of the 70s, 80s where motorcycling was at its peak.
Right.
So it was never a question.
Right.
Whether I don't know about your backstory, but I mean, for me, it was never in doubt. There was always bikes around.
Right.
But now, I think of kids that were born in the 90s. I mean, that's why my friend Simon and, Dom and Moisey and Shane and all those boys back home, we're all connected by this glue of motorcycling, but that glue is getting, the crew is getting smaller.
Yeah.
So I want to make sure it keeps growing.
Yeah, I mean, that's always a concern. I mean, kids these days, whether they're, and I don't mean just anything specific to the pandemic, but kids being a little bit more sheltered, maybe they're on their devices more, is that, the ability to go out and explore and not constantly have a parent looking over your shoulder or within, and eyesight, is that, when I was a kid, I had a lot of autonomy. I got to do a lot of exploring, and I enjoyed that adventure and that freedom to go do that. And motorcycling is part of that. And like you said, the danger, whether people like to talk about it or not, is I think a lot of motorcyclists and other people like to downplay the danger part because we want to be able to continue doing it. But that's part of the excitement. That's part of what makes you feel more alive when you ride, is that there is an element of danger. So whether you're into surfing or mountain climbing or whatever, where there's something that's got where, hey, you could fall and get hurt, something could happen, that's a big part of it. So
doing so, I've noticed that kids seem to grow faster if they do something that's dangerous, but they do it not supervised, but they do it to a level where they feel like they're going to be okay.
Yeah.
There's a good chance that they could get hurt.
Yeah.
But if they use their wits about them and they trust their instincts, that's the thing I hate to say the school fights are not a good analogy. That's not a good thing.
Right.
Don't want the kids to get bashed up in school. I don't want kids to be aggressors in school, but it sort of heightens the fight or flight mentality. But it's a different mindset to being I'm going to climb that thing.
Yeah.
I'm going to get to the top of that thing. And if you fall, you're going to get fucked up. But you're not going to fall because you know that you're going to get to the top of that thing. And it's the same thing with motorcycling.
Right.
And I can't hang shit on motorcycling because it's given me a life. Right. It's given my family an identity. It's given me an identity. And I wouldn't be who I am now without it.
Right.
For the injuries and all the, for everything that's gone on. Yeah. If I fell off tomorrow and God forbid, touch wood, touch everything, that I fell off and I broke my back, I could never be bad at my motorcycling because I was doing what I wanted.
Right.
So it's, I don't know. It's a hard thing to explain to people that don't already get it.
Right.
It's kind of one of those things like big wave surfing. If you know, you know.
Right. Yeah. Well, I mean, like I say, that's the thing about, riding motorcycles is that, or any other activity that could be like that is if you didn't do some of those things, your life could be somewhat diminished. If you only stay at home and you don't ever take some chances or challenge yourself. I'm of the mind that people need to sort of challenge themselves. They need something to push against. I mean, it's just sort of like that's what makes us as humans our best selves. Like when you're challenged with something could go wrong. And if something does go wrong, you've got to sort of adapt to that situation and deal with it. If everything is safe and nothing can ever go wrong, I think we just sort of like we atrophy as people.
This is why I've always enjoyed. What I was saying before is like I always loved traveling.
Yeah.
And I love traveling by myself. And that was half the reason why I managed to go, hang on, solo travel, solo motorcycling thing as a career.
Yeah.
But like when you go on your own to a foreign land, you have to think on your feet.
Yeah.
Like you have to be ready. Like if shit goes down, like you got to be ready. And it's a great thing to teach kids.
Yeah.
The best thing I ever did. It is the one point in my life where I have an absolute fork in the road in terms of I was going to go this way, I was going to go that way.
Right.
I mean, best thing I ever did.
Yeah.
And like, probably financially, I'm probably a lot worse off for doing it. But far out, man. Like, if I die tomorrow, I die a happy man.
Yeah.
So it's like, it's all good.
Well, like I said, I mean, we're sitting here in this hotel room in California. We spent 300 miles riding a new Suzuki Sport Tour. We had fun today. We had a lot of laughs at the breaks and so forth. We're testing the motorcycle. We're out taking some photographs. I have to say, getting to know you since you joined the staff at Cycle News. We've been to a lot of press launches together in a lot of parts of the country and the world and so forth. And it's been my pleasure and sort of it's a privilege to be able to work in the industry. And like you said, you are able to do something that you were a mechanic. You said that you had a job that was was tough and was not very satisfying. That motorcycling has given you the opportunity to do what you love and travel and see the world and so forth. So. Yeah, it's been an honor to get to know you and hang out. So I appreciate you coming on the show.
Yeah, man. Thanks. Thanks for having me, man. I really appreciate it. Thanks very much.
Yeah, so thanks for listening. I'm Greg Drevenstedt for the Rider Magazine Insider Podcast. Keep the rubber side down.
Cheers, boys. And girls.
If you've enjoyed listening to the Rider Magazine Insider Podcast, please subscribe. Leave us a positive rating and tell your friends. We also encourage you to visit ridermagazine.com, where you can get the latest in motorcycle news and reviews and sign up for our free weekly newsletter. You can also subscribe to print and digital editions of Rider Magazine, which is published 12 times a year. Thanks again for listening.